Hi, Denise Gwen, reading aloud for you from my novel, His Christmas Eve Proposal, Book 3 in the Medicine Women of Alaska, Chapter 19. When Naomi ran out of safe topics for conversation, she hit on the idea of playing a version of 20 Questions with him. As they walked down the path, she said, Tell you what? Tell me why Christmas is your favorite holiday." He glanced over at her and chuckled. "I don't believe I've ever said anything of the kind." "Of course you have." "No, I haven't." "Yes, you did," she returned gamely. "You just did." "What makes you think Christmas is my favorite holiday?" "Nothing," she said with a sly grin. "Just wanted to get a reaction out of you." "You've succeeded." He shivered in mock horror. "Not my favorite holiday? Not at all." "Is it too personal to ask why?" Inwardly, she thought of her brother Jackson. Christmases in the years before his death had definitely been her favorite holidays, but afterwards, not so much. When her dad remarried, her stepmother brought her own kids into the mix, and she made Naomi feel included. And her dad and stepmother started new family traditions, and Naomi ended up loving Christmas all over again. But Jackson... Poor Jackson. Jackson would have loved this part of the country. He'd been a wilderness trekking kind of fellow and loved it just as much as she did. And if he were still alive, he would have been dreaming up every excuse to visit her and take part in the beautiful wonderment that was Alaska. Naomi kept these thoughts to herself as she walked along with Drew to the opposite side of the lake. He stopped and pointed up the hill. "There, do you see my cabin?" "Oh, how lovely. So you really could hike on this trail by walking out your back door." "Yes." "Your house looks huge from this angle." "It's 'cause it's on top of a hill," he grinned. A wave of fatigue washed over her, and she knew she needed another water break. And she noticed a large slab of shale laid out as if it had been prepared specially for her. And she suggested that they rest, and Drew agreed. And so she stretched out, and at that particular moment, the sun broke through the clouds and shone down upon them, and she basked on the slate like a well-contented cat and drowsed for a few minutes. She started awake and looked around her. "So is this the lake at the bottom of the hill at your cabin?" "Yes, at the furthest point. And now that I'm finally on this trail, I do understand what Paul meant when he said it looked as if you could just walk up that hill to my house." "It's a long walk?" "It's much longer than it appears. There's another significant hillock before you reach the lake at the bottom of my property." "Really?" she said in astonishment. "Yes, really. My cabin's a good 5-mile trek from here." "It does look kind of tiny from here," she said. "This is national parkland right here, so I'll always be guaranteed a lot of space and land between me and the Velasquez property," he said proudly. "I'm glad to hear that." Naomi felt tiny and insignificant in this magnificent state. It'd been an adjustment for her to segue from one of the most crowded and densest cities in the world to this remote wilderness where the nearest neighbor might be 5 miles away. Despite being a single person in a huge city, she'd really stood out. Her connection with the Velasquez family made her famous. And she'd been well respected in her own right as a surgeon until suddenly she wasn't. She escaped the hoopla only to find herself in the shadow of an enormous development from the very family she was running from. Why in the world did Vittorio Velasquez decide to plunk his magnificent hotel and resort on top of this mountain? She hoped never to bump into him. She only hoped she wouldn't run into Hermano. But more than that, she didn't want to ever see Ricardo. She started, noticing that Drew was gazing intently at her. "Are you okay?" he asked. "Oh, sure, I'm fine, just fine." She was hiding in plain sight. She could hide like this for the rest of her life. Can I, though? Or will I get bored and long for the big city lights? She sat up and tucked her knees underneath her to stretch her legs. In a low voice, she said, "All this reminds me of my brother." Drew gazed at her. He said he wanted to move to Alaska when he grew up, study grizzly bears in Denali National Park. He did, huh? Yes. He loved the great outdoors. You claim you don't like the outdoors as much as your brother Paul, but I'm looking at you right now, and you're sitting contentedly on a slab of rock beside me, looking all happy and mellow. "I am happy," he said simply. "Do you want to know why I'm happy?" "Sure. Why are you happy?" "Because I'm here with you." Her heart swelled open, and a suffusing of joy warmed her, but she said nothing. "Christmas is coming," Drew said. "What do you remember about Christmas that you most enjoyed growing up?" "Oh, a lot of things." A lump formed in her throat. "Honestly, Christmas was my favorite holiday, especially Christmas Eve. What with all the excitement and the beautiful serenity of the Christmas Eve service." "Yes," he said, his eyes glowing. He wanted her to continue. "My brother used to take me to the Christmas Eve service. He always made a point of taking me alone. He wanted his special time alone with me. We went to the early service first, you know, the children's service. And then we'd book it home for a quick dinner. And then my parents and Jackson and I returned for the evening mass." "That sounds really nice," Drew said. "Yes, that used to be a beautiful moment for me, sharing that time with Jackson." Her throat filled with tears. Drew wisely said nothing. He sat back and drank his water, glancing over at her every few moments. She fought back tears and looked away so as not to make eye contact with Drew. When she concentrated on the good things, the good memories with Jackson, it helped her to forget the bad things, such as the fact that Jackson died on Christmas Eve. And it was partly why, when Ricardo Velasquez slid that gorgeous rock onto her left ring finger and asked her when she wanted to marry him, she'd suggested Christmas Eve. Not because it seemed romantic, because it was romantic, but because she'd hoped that getting married on Christmas Eve would help combat the terrible memories and associations she endured every year on the anniversary of Jackson's passing. When she realized there was no way she could be happy as Ricardo's wife and abandoned him at the altar on Christmas Eve, Pain and anguish added to her bitter memories. Painful memories on top of painful memories. Drew turned to look at her. It has to be hard losing a brother. It's awful, and I'm so sorry. She startled with surprise. I didn't come right out and tell you that my brother died. Painful memories on top of painful memories. Drew turned to look at her. It has to be hard losing a brother. It's awful, and I'm so sorry. She startled with surprise. I didn't come right out and tell you that my brother died. I know. If you were getting so sad talking about your brother and this ritual you had of attending Christmas Eve services with him, and you weren't talking about him coming up here to celebrate Christmas with you, then it probably meant you'd lost him. Yes, she said and nodded. I kind of don't like Christmas for a different reason. What reason is that? What reason is that? For all the crass commercialization of it and the way it forces a lot of people to spend money on gifts that they can't afford, buying all this useless stuff that nobody remembers. He sounded angry as he spoke. She gazed curiously at him. So you hate Christmas from the commercial aspect. I get that. But what do you like about the season itself? I don't let myself get all worked up around Christmas time, he said. Ricardo never would have wanted to spend the day on a mountain hike. He liked doing flashy things. It wasn't worth going out if he couldn't do something that'd catch the public eye. Every public outing had to be for a good reason. To be noticed, photographed, and heralded in both the papers and in the tabloids. He wouldn't dream of doing something this quiet and low-key. He'd never be caught wearing comfortable, rugged clothing. He worked out in a private gym inside his mansion in Bel Air and with his personal trainer attending to him. He never wanted people to see the real Ricardo. He went everywhere in his chauffeured limousine. Never would he have climbed into a truck and driven through the rough mountain terrain. Before every evening outing, a private makeup artist and hairdresser came to the mansion to apply full makeup to Naomi's face and to style and dress both her hair and Ricardo's. So much fuss, so much excitement, and for a time, yes, she'd enjoyed it all. But little by little, it begun to wear on her. The artificiality got to her. Slowly, she'd come to the realization that Ricardo could have had any pretty woman on his arm. It didn't matter who it was, as long as she was attractive. And when she realized she'd lost her identity as a surgeon, that was when she quit. One night, when Ricardo had been too tired to go out, they went to the Grove and wandered around window shopping. Ricardo bought her roasted nuts from a street vendor and then a hot chocolate from another. Yes, that'd been deeply lovely, but it'd been the only good moment in a season of stress and frustration. She wondered if she hadn't made a terrible mistake. Naomi looked around her at the glorious outdoors, at the wide open sky, and then glanced over her right shoulder to the enormous mountain behind her and noticed the beginning structures of the resort and spa. The only reason Ricardo would ever travel to such a remote location as this would be to check on the progress of the development and to ski. Quietly, she said, "We should get back." "Are you okay?" Drew asked, his words cutting through the fog of her emotions. "Yes," she said, "only maybe it's time we headed back." "Okay," he said. They remained right where they were. She smiled over at him. "I really am enjoying sunning myself on this huge slab, and you look beautiful doing it." She blushed and looked away, then forced herself to gaze at him. The quiet intensity in his eyes took her breath away. If she wanted to, she could just reach over and kiss him on those perfect lips, and she really did want to. She held his gaze for a moment longer, wondering if he wanted to kiss her. He did nothing. After another moment, she forced herself to look away. "Yes," she said at last with a deep sigh, "let's finish our hike." They scrambled to their feet, and Drew picked up her haversack and placed it upon her shoulders. He didn't actually touch her, but it was the closest he'd stood next to her since the surgery. Her head and her heart full of emotion and frustrated desire, she said, "Thank you." "Sure." Without talking, they rose to their feet and started hiking again. Naomi wondered if she'd made a mistake by agreeing to go out on this hike in the first place. She couldn't let herself get involved with someone, not after what she'd put Ricardo through. She didn't deserve Drew.